Welcome to a new model change notification video for the great battle series of IL-2. And today we take a look at the BF-109 G-4. In earlier videos I talked in detail about the predecessors, the G2 and F4, and in this video I will focus on the differences to those. If you want to learn how to fly the 109 in general, or if you want to get the entire picture, I recommend to watch the old videos as well. The G4 is part of the Battle of Kuban DLC and was released quite a while ago, back then, as Battle of Kuban was just announced basically and was released maybe as the first plane if I remember correctly. So it's out there for quite a while. Let's talk about the airframe changes first. As you may remember, the G2 had almost no changes to the airframe compared to the F4. But on the G4 a few things have changed. Most changes were done to ease the plane's handling on the ground. All three wheels of the landing gear are now bigger. This makes taxiing, landing and takeoff a bit more stable and easier. And this is actually noticeable in-game as well. The entire handling is just a little bit more smooth. This, however, does not come without its drawbacks. The bigger wheels still have to fit in the same wing and the tail, which they don't. So the wings have now some nice draggy bulges to accommodate the wheels. The tail wheel, however, does not fit into the tail altogether and is now not retractable anymore. And all the bulges and the tail wheel are now inducing quite some drag. More about the effects of that later. Maybe you ask yourself why the hell the Germans were doing that to their beautiful airframes. The landing gear was, maybe in your opinion, just fine. But it helps to remember that many pilots were lost to takeoff and landing accidents, and it was better for the Germans to lose a few kph, but hopefully to lose less pilots in horrible accidents. The cockpit, the loadouts and the armament remained unchanged, however. The main difference you will notice between a G2 and the G4 is the now unblocked emergency power. The G4 can now use the full 1.42 ATAR and 2800 RPM, and that setting is rated for 1 minute. That boosts the DB605 engine to 1480 horsepower. That is 130 horsepower more than the F4 could bring to the table. Of course, only rated for 1 single minute, but we will see that you can use that very effectively, especially if you consider that you can use settings between combat power and emergency power to your advantage. So, how does all this reflect on the performance in relation to the F4 and the G2 and the opposition, of course? Well, the aerodynamic changes make the G4 on combat power a few kph slower than the G2. The F4 is still slightly faster on most altitudes than both G2 and G4, even with less horsepower. On altitudes above 8K, the Gustavs gain the advantage, but the G4 only in second place because of that drag. The G4 climbs equally good compared to the G2 on combat power, but quite a bit better than the F4 thanks to 100 RPM more on combat mode. But of course, now with the unlocked emergency power, you have now the opportunity for amazing climb rates for a limited amount of time. A feature I highly enjoy in the G4. That leaves both G2 and F4 in the dust. Accelerations are mostly flown, or should be flown, in full power, as accelerations are usually critical in emergency situations. And the G4 clearly outclasses the G2 here. The F4 weighs roughly 100 kg less, but has less horsepower as well, leaving both aircraft about equally good for accelerations. If we now talk a little bit about maneuverability, the G4 maneuvers quite a bit better than the G2 since it can regain energy with more power a little bit more easy. That allows you to keep a good turning speed a bit better. But the F4 is clearly the most maneuverable 109, especially at lower speeds. However, I really like the Gustav stability at higher speeds. A feature I already praised in my G2 video, but still, now with more power, the freedom to maneuver is much improved. Against the opposition, there are no big changes in most regards. However, the F4 and the G2 were already slower than the Yak-1B and the LA-5 on the deck. This is now even more pronounced with the added drag, and the performance advantage to other Russian fighters like the Yak-1 Series 69 are now more narrow. It has to be said that on all other altitudes the negative impact is minimal and most of it can be undone by throttling up a bit. In terms of climb rate and acceleration, the G4 is much better than the entire opposition. Maybe only the LA5 can climb for the first 2000 meters with the G4, but that's about it. That's all being said. The G4 arrives in 1943 and there is a Soviet aircraft which arrives in 1943 as well, the LA5 FN, and that aircraft is another story altogether. The FN is much faster on the deck, clocking in at 582 kph against the 522 of the G4 in combat power, totally outclassed. The FN has, with its 1850 horsepower, a 350 horsepower advantage, and that for 10 minutes compared to the G4's minute. And the FN has now a good supercharger that holds that advantage over all important altitudes. A BF-109 without water methanol injection is just slower than the FN. And we only get MW50 from the G14 on. The climb rate, however, is another story. While the FN holds a substantial advantage on the deck, the advantage disappears on altitudes above 3000 meters. From there on, they are about equal. However, the G4 climbs a bit better on emergency power, but that advantage is super thin. The real trump card against the FN is not in a field where the usual German pilot is used to fight in, and that is pure maneuverability. While the FN rolls and turns nicely at cruise speeds, the FN becomes a brick at high speeds. Furthermore, the FN really don't like any turns. The FN loses in a pure turn fight, and it takes skill to cut corners and to avoid overshoots. Additionally, the FN is all the time on the verge of exceeding the never exceed speed, while the elevator can't be used efficiently at that point. Especially pushing down the nose is on speed practically impossible. The trim in the FN is not able to remedy the problem, so if you push the nose down in a chase, the chances are that the FN can't follow are very high. Diving down against the FN will end the immediate threat relatively quickly. Anyway, this video is not about the FN, but you will fight the FN rarely, but you will at times. Inform yourself if the enemy can field FNs and identify the aircraft in time. Adapt your fighting style accordingly. There's nothing an FN pilot likes more than Gustav pilots who are sticking to the old habits of fast, shallow climbs, or those pilots who are even trying to outrun the FN in a straight line. Yeah, good luck, mate. You will fight FNs not that often. Usually you will fight the usual suspects, and there the behavior is absolutely the same compared to the G2 and F4, and the G4 holds a big advantage over those enemies. Climb rate, energy retention, speed, and often maneuverability as well. Other new aircraft in the time frame are the P-39 and the Spitfire. The P-39 pilot will not see you in most situations, to be totally fair here. You will meet them mostly flying around and having no clue. It's not the pilot's fault, the pilots are generally speaking not bad, but it's hard to stay on a high situational awareness level in that thing. Other than that, and if you are really fighting a 39, you can easily outclimb them, you can outturn them at lower speeds, and you are much faster above 4K. P-39s are only dangerous when they are behind you and if they have energy on you. But they run out of steam quite quickly if you get them to maneuver. Don't dive away from them. They have a higher never exceed speed than your 109, and don't fly away in a straight line if they are close. Climb, cut into them and exploit the blind spots. Like I said, usually 39s are not super dangerous enemies. Spitfires are a different story and have to be fought in a different way. Usually not difficult to fight as well. It's the Spitfire Mark V, and the Mark V is hopelessly aged in 1943. Spitfires are only dangerous if they get close and if they are approached unseen. Unless you fight them on the deck, they are much slower, they climb slower and have a limited ammo supply. I recommend to use shallow climbs against them to benefit from both your speed and your climb rate. As soon as you are able to get some slashing attacks in, they will have a hard time to keep their energy. Basically fight them like you fight Yaks. But Spitfire are in my opinion easier to fight since they lack the range of the center line armament of the Soviet fighters. So you don't have to deal with those super dangerous prop hang attacks. But other than that, it's a good old 109 story in your G4. Being at a decent altitude depending on situation. Attack targets and exit with fast shallow climbs to stay aware of your surroundings. If clear, you can easily dictate the fight with vertical maneuvering, attacking and slashing attacks, forcing the enemy in lower and lower energy states until he is shot down. I really like the G4. Finally, plenty of power for emergencies, maneuverable, it's an excellent climber, very stable in maneuvers, and that wraps it up for the G4. If you like, check my Patreon page and fuel my video production with some nice 100 octane coffee. Like always, I have to thank my current patrons for the continued support. That is really awesome, I have to say. That helps really. Thank you very much. I hope I see you all in the next one.